Y'all are amazing hype people. Thank you. Hi. So welcome to Working in Web3 Insights for the Web3 Curious. I'm Rebecca, the head of community at Common Room. You're going to hear a little bit more about Common Room from our head of growth, Josh Grose, so I'll stop talking about it here. You are here, I presume, not to hear from me, but to hear from our 3 tenured, seasoned, and forward-thinking panelists, seasoned as much as we can be in the Web3 space. So 8 to 12 months? 3 years? Seasoned. I'd like to say thanks, or before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to say thanks on behalf of them and myself to a few different folks, a lot of folks that helped bring this together. Thank you to CMX and the Thrive event team for bringing all of us together here, and shout out to the online crew as well. Thank you to the folks tending the Fox Theater and a club, pretty cool, for tending it so well, taking care of all of us. And a big shout out to someone here at the Fox Club, Shabi, it's his birthday, who's doing all the sound. Gotta celebrate, man. And thanks to each of you for being here and for choosing to share some of your time. Ooh, my notes, they're getting cray. With all of us. Time is really special, so thank you for being here. Now let's do this thing. So I will briefly intro each panelist, and then we'll dive into what you are all here for, which is learnings about the Web3 space. And I'm sure that you're here for their different and nuanced perspectives that they bring because of the way that they're interacting with Web3 builders, building communities themselves, and or customers across the space. So our first panelist is Krystle Blough. She's the head of community at Boto, which is a B2C platform that helps people build bots to keep track of happenings in the NFT and cryptocurrency community. Krystle got started in community at WikiHow in 2005. She loves the scrappiness and curiosity and creativity that it takes to pursue new frontiers, so Web3 is going to be perfect for that. So she's done things from creating software for the recreational cannabis space to building and supporting the Web3 community at Boto. Our next panelist is Josh Grose, who I know well, who I love so much, because he's the head of growth at Common Room, which is the intelligent community growth platform that helps you deepen relationships with your members, build better products and experiences that people love faster, and both drive and measure business impact. So as Josh says it, while some folks have leapt into the Web3 space, he was pulled into it. And across that work and across those pools, he's gotten to work with dozens of Web3 community leaders and community customers across communities of all different shapes and sizes. So he brings a really interesting cross-customer, cross-community perspective on the needs of different people who are building in the Web3 space. And then Lori Goldman is our final panelist at the end. Last but not least, she is the developer community lead at IndieKite, which is a Web3 open source startup in the IAM, or Identity Access Management space. She was working in the IAM space for a decade plus, and then when she was ready to try on something new, she was keenly interested in Web3 and open source. And then serendipity or kismet or just straight up good community building, they all combined together, and Lori reconnected with a former colleague who she really admires. And now here she is today, working in the IAM space, but for Web3 communities. So let's get curious. To start, I would love to talk about, or have you all talk about really, the idea of entering the Web3 space, and then maybe some contrast to Web 2. So Lori, I'd love to start with you actually. You were in IAM a decade ago, right, where Web3 was maybe the glint in someone's eye, but that was about it. So what was it like to be in IAM a decade ago, in contrast, so that you can now say what it's like to be building IAM communities in the Web3 space?
Well, actually, I was in IAM a lot longer ago, and back when it was just a simple, small product at Sun Microsystems called OpenSSO. It's changed a lot. I think, with different technologies that have emerged, with end-to-end encryption, things like that, we've kind of gone from, I think, in the past decade or so, from like baby to fully blown adult. Now it's really interesting. The platform we're working on is really interesting. It has a lot of potential, and I'm just really excited to see it in action and to see people to see how people work with it and how they have much more control over their data and their privacy.
Cool. I want to dive deeper into that, but I also then want to hear from you, Josh, in terms of you working, as we were talking about, working across Web3 communities, and Web2 communities, right? You have customers at different levels of web, I'll call it. So when you look at customers at Web2 and then those who are building in the Web3 space, what are those differences and similarities that you see in terms of that contrast between Web2 to Web3?
Yeah, it's really interesting. When I think about when I first started entering Web3 communities, it was by joining Discords of Web3 communities, because I had to figure out what are these communities? And what you find is the community members that enter, usually they really are more of an audience. And so you start to see that these community members, they have 50 different Discord servers. So they're really part of all these different communities. And so getting their engagement, attention is a lot harder. And so the intentionality, the understanding of what they should expect within the community, it's really, really important, because the metrics that you would see in Web 2 just don't apply to Web 3 in terms of engagement or activation. Your organic growth can be like this, but maybe you're only shooting for a very small subsection of it. Whereas with Web 2, typically that signal of joining a community is so much stronger because there's intent there and they only belong to so many communities. And so I think just the entry point into community is a lot different, and there's so many people that are curious. There's fervor, enthusiasm in Web3 that, not to say it's not present in Web2, but it's completely different.
Krystle, I have a bit of a different question for you, but before I ask it, would you like to also add on or build on top of either of those things that Lori or Josh said?
Yeah, I think you mentioned a word, intention, and I think in the Web3 space, what I'm seeing is just people entering the space have this kind of bigger picture in mind. They don't necessarily just wander into the community or find themselves on this forum, and then your job is to attach meaning to their experience as a community person. They come in with all this wonderful baggage built in that is I am here to do something, to be part of something that's really innovative and exciting. And so it really is wonderful to build on that and have that already come in as a community professional, to be okay, they already have an intention behind being there, and now we just have to build on that.
So I love the positivity in that. Now I'm going to flip it and be okay, cool, let's talk about challenges. And so something that I really wanted to talk about with you were some of the biggest challenges that you perhaps see in the Web3 space. There's a lot of enthusiasm and there's a lot of uncertainty or ambiguity. And so as someone who loves the ambiguity of new frontiers, I think is a way that you would put it, what do you think those big rocks are, those initial challenges that you're seeing coming up in the Web3 space?
So I think some of the basic challenges in Web3 are just really the classic challenges of community. It's engagement, really. Especially there's just a lot of noise in the space. But let's be real, there's noise everywhere now on the internet. When I started in community, Facebook wasn't really as much of a thing. Algorithms weren't as much of a thing. So keeping someone's attention was a lot easier back then. And now there's just doom scrolling. So you've got to compete with doom scrolling no matter what. And so I think the issue of engagement, the classic question of how do I keep my community engaged, is still the most important question, no matter Web 2, Web 3, Web 7, whatever. In terms of the bigger picture, I think one of the biggest challenges the Web3 community faces is that we just don't know what's around the corner, and there's this general feeling that there's something great, there's something really good that's going to happen. And for those of us who've been watched the internet transform, there's no way people like our parents would have been able to ever predict what the internet would look like today. And it's really exciting to think about what Web3 is going to look like and just totally blow our minds. And so we all know there's this great thing, but when people ask us, I've been at this conference yesterday, today, talking about Web3, and people, every time someone asks me a question, I answer it a little bit differently, because it's always changing, right? We actually don't know, and that's kind of what's exciting about it. And so I think that's a good thing. I think that idealism that comes with that is a good thing. But I also think it's also a challenge, because you have to constantly sell why you're investing time into something that no one has really understood what it's going to be and why we're doing it. We just know there's something there. There's something cool, something magical that we want to be a part of.
Josh, before we get to the broader point of view of how you've seen this play out, or those challenges that Krystle kind of talks about across the different customers you've spoken to, or prospects, a lot of different voices, Lori, I want to ask you first to go like specific, right? Because like Josh is working across industries, and you're like in the specialty of IAM for specific like Web3 communities, right? Does that change what you see as those challenges, or do those challenges also apply even to something that is like as specialized as IAM?
I think there's a lot of similar challenges. I think the thing that I've had to get my head around is the whole decentralization, because I'm kind of used to working on enterprise level platforms, and we have a sister company that's building a platform. So we've got a kind of growth curve on that, and it's super exciting. And there's also, and this is just something that I'm noticing, is kind of doing this melange, like this patchwork of, well, here's the best of breed in podcast, here's the best of breed in event management, patching those together rather it being in the same place. And that's a challenge that I'm seeing. And I was actually having a really neat conversation last night with someone about that. Like, how are we going to do the engagement piece? How are we going to follow them if, I've got someone in Discord, and then I've got someone on Slack, and then I've got someone, here in IndieWrite, which is our sister company platform. So how am I going to do that? And how am I going to keep them engaged and create FOMO and enrich them? So that's the big one for me, and that's the one that kind of keeps me up at night.
That might be an amazing tee-up. Josh, I think you have some sort of answer you'd probably want to share about this, because I think you've heard this a lot.
So like I want to like flip it from like what are the challenges to what are the opportunities, because there are a lot of them. But really, like when you go into a Web3 community, I was talking to a community manager that had made the transition from Web2 to Web3, and he was saying, he's like, have you seen The Wolf of Wall Street? Like when they're in the trading room and everyone's screaming and like it's just pure chaos. He's like, that's what it's like for most people when they walk into their first Web3 community. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like I can't even open Discord right now. And the challenge is like, yes, there's like all the noise, because really you're like triggering off of two channels primarily, like your Twitter, Discord, a little bit like Telegram and so forth, which like aren't necessarily built for like Discord actually does a pretty good job at this and it's getting better. But like Twitter, it's like, it starts off with like, there's people are shilling, there's a lot of scams, there's links, like you're afraid of everything. And so when you walk in, you get a DM in Discord and you're like, who's this? Like, I don't know you, like, and don't seem to be welcoming me. What do I do? And so everyone turns their DMs off. And so it's like, how do you create a relationship when you don't have that same access? And then there's anonymity in there, and so it's like you have no context to who these people are or what might be interesting to them unless they share it. So how do you get that out of them? And then this whole relationship, it's all built digitally. And so it's like, how do we get that like real world? And so we have to get voice in there. And so like the challenges are, it's like the only way communities flourish is with connections and shared purpose and all of that. And if you can't establish that very quickly, and like have that really important, like what is the utility of this community to me, then like you can't build a community. And I think that's what people are trying to like rally around and look at when I build a community. Like, do we know why we're building it? Do we know who's going to be in it? And so it's like, it's really important to like take everything we've learned from Web 2, but you have to apply it like immediately. So
I have a bit of a follow-up question for you in terms of the community management, for the actual community manager point of view.
Yeah.
But before I ask you that, I want to make sure Lori or Krystle, is there anything that you wanted to respond to? I want to hold space for that.
Just to echo a little bit, I think one thing that's exciting too about people coming into those Discords is that they're coming in seeking out community, which is pretty cool. Like most of the time, people come in, they, like I said earlier, they just wander in, or they're not necessarily like, oh, what community can I join today? They're like, what knowledge do I need? And then they find people hanging out there, and then they're drawn to stick around. But in the Web3 space, you do find people who are like judging your community from the second they get there. And so those first impressions make such a big difference, because they understand what community is, and that's a big part of why they're there.
Lori, I see you nodding. Anything you wanted to add?
Well, we were all talking about, what makes us think about, Web3 community. What do we think is a Web3 platform? We all went Discord. There is something about Discord. I think there's a little bit of grittiness or an edge to it that makes it so different from other forum-driven platforms, and I really enjoy it. I think it's really neat, and I don't know, in terms of maybe where Web3 is going, that might be kind of one direction, but I think everybody else did a really beautiful job.
It definitely takes
explaining
some
it.
getting used to for me, though. I did not
Discord?
like Discord. I'm a forum kind of girl, so.
I really enjoy it. One in particular, too. So,
We could start having stickers, where it's like, am I a forum person, and am I like a pseudo-anonymous like type of poster? There's probably a lot of ways to be like, well, do you like sushi or do you like tacos? You're like forum or online chat app. Okay, so Josh, you talked about how you had discussed with a community manager who went from Web 2 to Web 3. So I imagine there are either a lot of community managers in this room or will be tuning in now or later that are thinking, okay, maybe I'm going to take the leap into it, or they're thinking maybe they just get pulled into it regardless of having planned on taking the leap. And so I'm wondering if specifically for them as an individual who might be entering Web 3 from Web 2, what are some things they should be thinking about? What are some things that they should be prepared for, expectations you might be able to set, not only from customers that you see when you compare 2 to 3, but even this person specifically who made the leap already?
We're going to need more than 13 minutes.
Okay,
I think,
great.
But,
Well, you got an extra 27 seconds, so you're welcome.
24.
Okay, so like if it was me and I was going to say I'm going to leave this Web 2 world that I completely understand going to Web 3, like one of the things that I've noticed about Web 3, because again, I have this like beautiful like overview where I get to see all these communities and all the interactions and the sentiment, and so it's like I get to see really quickly like what is the health of a community. And like what I started to see was like those healthier communities, like there's actually similar to Web 2 where you have like communities of practice, communities of product, communities of interest or hobbies. It's the same thing in Web 3, but like a lot of people want to create new labels or like just be like original. I don't think it's as like original as like it like is put on to be, because like what happens is like if you're building like lower layer Web 3 products, then you're actually like building like an open source project. You're working with developers, and so you have partners and ecosystems, and it's very similar. And so you have to create those same type of communities. And so if you're looking at like joining Web3, it's like first saying like, okay, if they're like these NFT type of projects that might be more artistic and it like, is there utility? Why would people join this versus the thousands of other NFT projects? And like, who's running this project? Because like what you find is in the new frontier, anybody can go in and start their own project and start a Discord server. And so if like for you, if you're gonna bet your career on something, it's like, well, who are these folks? Like, do they really believe in community? What do they think this community should be? How are we going to continue to provide utility? Because like one of the like core aspects of Web3 is ownership. Like a community member has a token or something that grants them access, or they work towards something. And so it's like, well, if they're going to hold on to this token and it's going to be worth something to them, how do you continue to provide value to them so that they want to stay engaged? Because the other thing with decentralization is like, how do you share context across like all these new members coming in and want to contribute so that they can actually build towards something big? And so I think for like, if you're thinking about it, it's like, well, what type of project like most reflects what I want to work on? And then are the type of people that are in there, is my leadership like really in line with like what community means? Because the nice thing is everybody is invested in community, because you don't have like traditional marketing or anything like that. And the only place you interact and get feedback is in community, and so everybody is plugged into it in Web3, which is like super exciting from a community manager perspective, because you're always top of mind.
Something that I'm wondering, Krystle, is that as the head of community at Bota, right, you might be thinking, or doing it actively, how do I build out my community team? And so tactically, whether or not you're currently doing that, when you think about in a very tactical level, how you might write that job description, right? Where you're like, hey, this would be really great for you to have as a community manager coming into this space. How might you write that? Like, what do you think you would ask that person to be able to feel confident in doing as they're gonna like build and support and engage your Web3 communities?
I would definitely look for someone with a lot of the classic good qualities of a community manager, about 80% of that, right? But then in terms of like what I would require for this kind of position would be knowledge of how to use Discord, and specifically how to manage Discord security. with the prevalence of scamming, like you really want someone who, one of your biggest vulnerabilities in Discord is if your staff, someone who has admin rights, clicks the wrong link, and then they have access to your server, they can pose as staff, and then they can scam everybody in your community. Your community is done if that happens. That's such a disaster, and it can happen so easily. So I would definitely look for someone who is a little bit familiar with that or is willing to be familiar, understands, takes it seriously, takes security really seriously, because that is definitely a bigger concern in this area than in any other area. And I actually wouldn't necessarily look for someone who's like super Web3 savvy. Like I'd rather have someone who's really curious and really just a fast learner and is just kind of fascinated by the space than someone who comes in like and says, I own like 70 NFTs and look at my wallet and you can't even see my real name. And and if
Tell
they
us how
wanted
you
to
really-
do that, that's fine. But I still want to see, good community management background, and I still want to see good knowledge of security. And I also want to see someone who understands how fast things happen in Web3. Like unlike other communities that I've managed or been a part of, there's this FOMO in Web3 where you have to keep up fast with new information. So a lot of people who use Boto are building bots that they bring into their community, into their Discord, into their Telegram groups that post things like, this new NFT was just posted with this like rarest trait ever. And there's value in Web3 to have that information fast. Like, for those of you who are familiar with the Ethereum merge that happened last night, there were countdown timers everywhere. Like every person who knew what was going on was watching it, was refreshing pages. So it's good to keep in mind that if you're looking for someone in that space, that they understand there's a timeliness to it. You have to be like fast, fast, fast. You have to constantly provide new information even when you're sleeping. Like that's why you use a bot, so that it can pull in the right information to the people who are awake across the world who just want to keep up with what's happening in Web3.
Man, I think when you were saying security is job zero, essentially, Lori's like, yeah, like I am. That's the identity and access management is what it's all about. She's like, thanks, speaking my language. Also, have you seen my wallet? Is an amazing bumper sticker. That's amazing. So I want to be really cognizant of time, and there's a question here I think that we should certainly get to, which is Web3 community health metrics. Obviously, it's a new and emerging space, and so it's probably going to evolve and maybe be a bit amorphous and maybe squishy. But as deep and tenured and seasoned community managers across spaces, right, I'm sure you have some directional idea of like what you believe success either looks like today or should or will look like. So Lori, I'd love to start with you in your day-to-day. How do you think about understanding if your community is healthy, if it is successful? What are the KPIs you're looking at? Or maybe they're not KPIs, but directional movements.
Well, ours is still growing. I think you're still going to look at things like DAO and MAO. My thing is, though, I really like to observe behavior. I think what I've seen on the web is like two extremes. Like people are either really into it or they're really angry at it. And I want to know what's going on in the middle. So that's one of the things I like to listen to. And one thing I learned from my colleague Pablo Gonzalez is no matter what you're doing with your data, to always wrap it in a story. Because for me to say, well, we had 10% growth over the last 3 months, and here's why, but when you talk about it in a more personal way, like, this developer is very new, did not want to be involved, was, afraid of learning new things, and we offered this value to them, and we tried this, this, and this, and now this person has, joined the hackathon, and so if you can really explain things that way, that's kind of where I am. But I am still, to go back to that, the decentralization and the picking from the best of breeds, how the heck am I going to measure that? That's something that I'm kind of grappling with now. Like, if it goes in that direction, how exactly do I measure that? And what tools am I going to use to do that?
So Josh, let's ask you to expand that way out, right, across the dozens of communities that you've worked with of different shapes and sizes. How are they looking at it, and what are the Venn diagram intersections that each of them is doing, and then what are some of the niche or special ways that they're kind of approaching it?
Yeah, so like when I've talked to community managers that are just jumping into the community for the first time and they're getting their bearings, you start with like the standard like engagement growth metrics, and they end up on a dashboard that you share relatively regularly, but like you need to move very quickly beyond that, because what happens is, just like to Krystle's point on like all the fervor and noise. You need to get those folks that are really interested in the tech or in the project, like into a cohort very quickly. So it's like, okay, their own channels or so forth. And then you start measuring like engagement, sentiment, because sentiment actually, like for better or worse, is so important right now in this space, because when you think it's like the Wild West, like everybody has their own NFT or project, and you have no idea which ones are going to be successful or not. It's really important to understand like that we have a positive sentiment, because if you have negative, you can go down very quickly, and everybody, like we've all come across communities which they look dead, and rebuilding them is impossible for the most part. And with Web3, people are moving on very quickly. And so going from your baseline engagement just to like get a gut check and keep an eye on that, but really it's about like, okay, let's first take them into like ambassadors or influencers or this or that, and create these groups and measure engagement from them and their sentiment and so forth. So it's all about like kind of just roping off certain portions. And I think that's what I'm most excited about with Web3 is you have to be so creative and so intentional. You can't just create one super user program, or it's not just like user and customer advocacy. It's like we have all these folks that want to contribute. And as you start to like do this DAO like governance model where some people are helping it on marketing, others are helping on the project and so forth, art, creatives, whatever, it's like measuring them, because you have to take care of them, because without them your project dies. Like, and so it's all about like getting them and then keeping a pulse on like what is their sentiment, like how active are they, because if you start to lose one of those, it impacts the project. And it's like it's very different than if you have a captive audience and membership because you have a great product, and so you could always like backfill an ambassador, but there like you need like those core aspects of your community can contribute so much, especially in how fast everything moves.
Krystle, does that resonate? Is that sort of the ways that you're looking at community health, or?
Yeah, definitely. And I think in particular for my community, since we're a platform, it's hard to uncouple community metrics from product usage, and that's very expected. But in particular, what we do is we want people to share their bot recipes, their automation recipes with other people. So we have a library where anyone can add to it and say, oh, I built this automation that posts this NFT with this trait at this price, and then they make that publicly available for other people to copy that. So there's a lot of creativity there. So, and that's a little bit more akin to my background in wikis, where you're contributing to a common resource. And so for me, a metric that I would pay close attention to is how many recipes, how many templates are getting created and contributed by community per week.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think no matter what, when you see people actively contributing, that is such an indicator of health, right? I want to participate. I want to add my voice or my experience or my expertise. Okay, so we're nearly there. Look at this already. What party. One thing you're most excited for in the next year, and then just one. Each of you gets one. One thing, I'm gonna start with you, Lori, and come down this way. One thing you're most excited about in the next year, and then where can people connect with you or find you?
I think just seeing the growth. I think that's going to be really interesting, and figuring out how I'm going to put the puzzle together, and how I'm going to do it with the support of the company and our sister company. That's what I'm really excited about. And that it moves so darn fast. Oops, that's two.
Snuck it in there. That's all right. That's all right.
I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always on the CMX server. I'm always on Venue Logan's Discord server. And just come say hi. And thank you guys. It was wonderful to speak to you all.
Thank you.
I think like what I've learned most in the last, say, 6 months of really being like in depth there is like the data. Like there's so much data like around communities, around Web3 specifically, with the volume, sentiment, like that, like we're learning so much more rapidly on what healthy communities look like and how you can inform your strategy based on it, and then bridging some of the stuff that Krystle mentioned around like some of those other lagging indicators, whether it's product usage or so forth, and bringing it all together. I think like the story in terms of the value of community is really going to be told this year.
And where can people find out more about you?
Everywhere. No, I'm pseudo-techie on Twitter. You can be like follower 261. And LinkedIn, I guess. We're also Uncommon, which is our common room community for Web3. It's more like community professionals, really, but Web3, DevRel. So there's a place for everybody that's in community.
Cool. Thanks so much, Josh. And Krystle, one thing you're really excited about and where
20
people can...
seconds.
22.
Sorry.
I'm really excited about these like Trojan horse NFTs that some companies are launching. Like Reddit launched called digital collectible avatars. They are not using the word NFTs. They are NFTs. So they're kind of like stealth getting NFTs into the mainstream. And Starbucks just announced that they're doing something like that also. So I'm really excited about what that's going to do for the technology, because Reddit users, if you ever search Reddit for Reddit avatars on Twitter, you'll see how much people on Reddit hate NFTs. Yet Reddit's going in there and being like, "Here, have a digital collectible. Just start a wallet. It's fine.
Have you seen
Don't
my
worry
wallet?
about it. It's fine." It's not a wallet. It's a vault. And so I'm really excited about that, like, kind of sneak attack that some of like the big players are doing to get this. You know, they could do it in a much easier way. They definitely can have collectible avatars without having them be NFTs. So it's a big signal that these huge companies are sneaking that in there into their user base and working that in. And I think it's going to do so much for onboarding more people and kind of getting rid of this perception of NFTs are just scams, because there is a lot of like scamming in the industry, but there's also a lot of utility. And so I'm really excited to see how that kind of transforms the perception and how people see NFTs that are not NFTs.
Well, I think we're so glad that you're one of those people that loves New Frontiers and that you're helping lead it. Where can people find out more about you?
So I'm active on Twitter, Krystle Blough, and if you go anywhere near bozo.io, there's a very good chance that I will be the person who says hi to you very soon.
Amazing. Everyone, thank you so much for being here. Happy birthday again to Xavi.
Thank you, Rebecca.
And thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.